Jesus.
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 How sweet the sound, how magnificent the name.
How miraculous the sacrifice.
That changed the world forever.
Celebrated as the King with cheers, excitement, laughter.
He's coming. He'll save us.
But then the darkness knocked on his door.
He opened it. He let it in.
He didn't save himself from torture or death.
This was his blood.
This was his body.
Poured out for everything I'd ever done.
He was laid in total darkness.
We were alone, without hope.
We thought it was over. Until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't.
There is no grave that can hold him.
That immovable stone moved.
Dark grave, filled with light.
He came back for me. He overcame everything I couldn't.
My sin, the grave meant for me.
The penalty that I was supposed to take.
The end of me.
Now has a beginning.
His triumph.
His death.
His reign.
His heart.
He conquered death.
And the miracle that was meant for the whole world.
It's also the miracle just for me.
Just for me.
Just for me.
Jesus. How sweet the sound.
You're good.
Matthew chapter 27, 45 through 50. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said, He's calling Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar and put it on a stick and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit.
Thank you, Brinkley. That's where we'll be focusing today. We are in the middle of a series that we're just calling The Last 24 Hours. And what we're doing is we're looking at the last 24 hours of Jesus' life before he went to the cross. And we're trying to gather some information about how we should handle our own lives when in 24 hours our lives shift. Our lives move, our lives maybe are flipped upside down. And so last week we just looked at this idea that in the last 24 hours, the first thing Jesus did for his disciples when he knew they were going to face 24 hours that would change their lives forever is he expressed to them and reminded them that they're loved. That Jesus gave them a tangible experience by washing their feet, and he reminded them that they are loved. And he wanted them to take this moment of him washing their feet, and he wanted them to remember this when their lives were flipped upside down. And last week, I simply asked you to do this. I simply asked you to write yourself a letter. Maybe right now your life is good, and I encouraged you that in the good times when things are going well to write yourself a letter and just remind yourself how incredibly loved you are so that when you face 24 hours that changes your life, you can pull that letter out and you can have a tangible reminder that you are loved. The first thing Jesus did was remind his disciples that they're loved. And over the course of the next 24 hours, Jesus and his disciples were facing just an emotional roller coaster. In the next 24 hours, the disciples would flee in fear of their lives. Peter would deny Jesus 3 times. Judas would betray Jesus. And Jesus would go to the cross and be hung and crucified. And it had to be an emotional roller coaster. And so tonight, we're simply asking this question. How are we supposed to respond to and handle our emotions in the midst of 24 hours that changes our lives? How are we supposed to respond to and handle our emotions in the midst of 24 hours that changes our lives? June 1st of 2002, I did something that some of you are about to do. I put on my cap and my gown, and I stepped across the stage and became a high school graduate. There I am right there. We had blue caps and gowns. And I stepped across the stage and I became a high school graduate. And in the midst of that moment, there was like this excitement and incredibleness, and I'm done with high school and this is awesome. But there was like a whole range of emotions that was happening in my life at that moment. I was excited, I was done with high school, but I was also terrified because I was about to leave my friends and the place that I knew best. That made me a little sad that I was not going to see my friends nearly as much, and I was scared because I was about to go to a school out of state where I knew absolutely no one. Well, I knew one guy, but not super well. And so the question becomes, when we face all of these incredible emotions and our lives just feel like, holy cow, I don't really know how to handle what is going on inside of me, how should we respond? How should we handle our emotions? I know that I was not super prepared to handle all of the emotions that I was facing at the time when I graduated and went off to college. And I don't know if you have experienced 24 hours that has changed your life or not, yet or not, but I can guarantee that at some point you are going to experience 24 hours where you have this incredible range of emotions. And so the question is, how should we handle our emotions? I mean, because God gave us emotions. He placed those feelings inside of us. He gave us the feelings that well up inside of us, the happiness and the excitedness, along with the sadness and terrifiedness that comes along with it. He gave us all that. And so how do we take that and ball it up and use it for God? And so I want to look today at a couple ways that Jesus' disciples handled their emotions, or one of them, and the way that Jesus himself handled his emotions. In Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 59, it says this: "And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, 'Certainly this man was with him, for he too is a Galilean.' But Peter said, 'Man, I do not know what you're talking about.' And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, 'Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times.' And he went out and he wept bitterly." You want to talk about an emotional time. Just hours earlier, Jesus sat in a room with Peter. And Jesus said, "All right, guys, next 24 hours are going to be crazy and terrifying, and you all are going to run and leave me alone." And Peter's always that guy, that guy that kind of stands up and says what he's thinking, and maybe he speaks a little too quickly. And so he stands up and he's like, "Nope, not going to happen. I'm not going to leave you. Matter of fact, I'm going to die with you." And Jesus says, "Nope, actually, you're going to deny me 3 times. And so Peter goes from being the guy that's like, "Jesus, I'm going to die with you. I'm going all the way with you. They're not going to pull me away from you," to the guy that is hiding scared in a courtyard saying, "I don't know the man." In another gospel, it says that Peter actually called down curses saying, "I don't know the man." The equivalent of cussing the guy out while he says, "I don't know who you're talking about." But I love what happens next. Peter realizes what he's done, and he goes out and he weeps bitterly. Can you imagine the emotion of that moment? Can you imagine the thoughts of Peter? What have I done? I was the guy that was there, like I was going to die with him, and now here I am, and I've denied him, and he looked at me, and we'll talk more about that look next week, what it may have meant, but he looked at me and he just weeps. How do we handle those emotions? I've noticed a trend that is slowly getting better, but it's still pretty disturbing to me. We live in a culture that says we should take all of our emotions and we should ball them up into a nice little ball and we should shove them down away somewhere in ourselves and not allow ourselves to feel whatever emotions we're feeling. You guys have experienced this. When you get hurt and you're in pain, people say, "You're okay. You're all right." You know, when you're crying, people say, "Stop crying." You know, when you go to someone, you're like, "Dude, I'm struggling. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this." You hear the phrase, "Suck it up. Everybody has problems." And all of these messages may seem like, you know, that people are trying to help you overcome your emotions, but all of these messages share one thing in common. They're asking you to take these emotions that are given to you by God, and they're asking you to just kind of brush them aside, to not feel them, to ignore the pain, to force yourself to stop the tears. And I love that we don't see Peter doing that. You know, the verse is very short. It just says Peter goes out and he weeps bitterly. What did that look like? When you read those words, he wept bitterly. What things was he screaming to God? What phrases was he using? Maybe you've said some things about yourself, like what Peter was saying. "I'm so unworthy. I'll never amount to anything. How could I have done this?" And he has all these emotions and all of these feelings, and he just lets them out. And it is hard to let out our emotions. But it is so, so vitally important that we don't just brush them aside. And I love that we see Peter here weeping and letting out his emotions. And we'll talk more about what happens after this fact when we talk next week about the way that Jesus looked at Peter and Jesus and Peter have an interaction after he rose from the dead. And we'll talk more about that later. But right now I just want to stay in this moment where Peter is in this courtyard and he is just letting his emotions out. Have you ever been there? Or maybe you've been there and you've just kind of tried to ignore them and push them down. You see, but Peter wasn't the only one that was feeling emotions at this time. You know, when I think of Jesus going to the cross, for as long as I can remember, when I have thought about Jesus going to the cross, I pictured him being stone cold, just taking it. Just like he was going and he was taking it on the chin and it wasn't any big deal and he was going to save the world, and it was like one of those things where he just was awesome. But as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that that's really not the way that Jesus went to the cross. Yes, he did go to the cross. Yes, he did take it. Yes, he went willingly. But there was a lot of emotion in Jesus' life as he went to the cross. If you look at the verse that Brinkley read earlier, we won't read the whole thing, but I do want to read just a little bit about it. There are two spots where I want to focus. One is where it says, about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Elik Eli lama sabachthani." That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That's a big phrase. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's a huge phrase that Jesus is expressing to God. We don't often picture Jesus questioning God. We just picture Jesus being like, all right, God, your will, I'm in, let's go, let's do this thing. But here, hanging on the cross, he is pouring out this emotion. He is pouring out the fact that he is unsure about what is to come. And this phrase is a connection to the book of Psalms, Psalm chapter 22. And what is really cool about this is that those listening would have heard him quote Psalm 22 and would have started playing that psalm in their mind. And then Jesus comes back and he says, it says that he cried out in a loud voice and he gave up his spirit. 2 times. Jesus comes and he just pours out his emotions. Now this phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's a pretty actually debated phrase. Some say that Jesus, at that moment, God turned his back on Jesus and he was turned away and Jesus was separated from God and Jesus is crying out in anguish saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some say, no, that's actually a connection to Psalm 22. And Jesus was not saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? He was quoting the entire psalm in that moment. And the entire psalm starts out saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? But ends in a chorus of victory. Here's what I think. And this is just my opinion, but I think it was a mixture of the two. I think in this moment, Jesus was giving us a perfect example of how to handle our emotions. I think in the midst of this moment, Jesus gave us a perfect example about how to handle our emotions. Here's the first thing he did. He expressed them. He expressed his emotions. Jesus felt betrayed by God. And Jesus told God that. Have you ever felt betrayed? Have you ever looked at God and been like, dude, God, what's up? Why am I facing this? I can remember a time in my life, which I've told you guys before, I went through this incredible period of depression that was just really, really difficult and hard, and my life was just kind of all over the place. But I can remember laying in my bed thinking, all right, God, where are you? Like, what is going on? I don't feel you. I don't feel like you're there. Where are you at? Because I can't get a hold of this. I can't get my life together. I can't get things back together. And I can just remember sitting there just talking to God and expressing phrases that as a Jesus follower, you're taught you should never say things like this to God. Well, I think that's another thing where we just try to hide our emotions. The truth is, God is big enough to handle all of our emotions. God is big enough to handle all of our questions. God is big enough to handle anything that we can throw at him, and Jesus proves it on the cross. He says, God, why are you doing this? Why have you forsaken me? He expresses his emotions. And the second thing that he does, and this is kind of seen in the Psalm 22, is he names his truth. We do this a lot in our family. We say, find your truth, find your truth. And we just started this actually a few years ago, where we're like, find your truth. Express your emotions and then find your truth. You see, when Jesus would have expressed this, my God, why have you forsaken me, from Psalm 22, the people around, because of their education, would have heard the entire psalm. It's kind of like someone quotes a song lyric and you know that, yeah, they're quoting the song lyric, but they also mean what the entire song is about. And so Jesus was quoting the entire psalm, and the psalm starts out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it goes into this, why are you so far from me? Why have you turned your back on me? But by the time the song ends, this psalmist, David, just starts naming his truths. He's like, you're still there. You're still listening. Even when I can't feel you, even when I can't hear you, you are still God. You are still worthy to be praised. And he just starts naming these truths. And so in this moment, I am convinced, again, this is just me, I am convinced that Jesus is expressing emotion and naming truth all at the same time. What's your truth? There are times where I get really down on myself. And I get down on myself about who I am. And I have to find my truth that I am loved and that I am a man of God and that I am a husband that loves his wife and a father that loves his children. And I have to start naming these truths in my life. Because Satan loves to kick us when we're down. And so we express our emotions. It's so valuable and so vitally important that we get our emotions out and then we name our truth. We find the truth about who we are. And then the last thing that Jesus does is he gives his spirit to God. And this last verse that we read where he cried out and then he gave his spirit to God. In one of the Gospels it says that Jesus says, into your hands I commit my spirit. And so I love that Jesus does this, is that he expresses his emotions, he names his truth, and then he allows his emotions to flow. Again, we do this a lot in our family. It just started a few years ago, but we say, okay, feel your emotions, feel your emotions, feel your emotions, name your truth. Now let's don't hold on to them. Don't try to go back and grab them. Just let them float down the river. That they came into your mind. You can't force them out of your mind. You can't force them out of yourself. You can't force them down into a part where they won't be discovered again. You just got to feel them, let them well up, and then let it just continue to flow. And that's exactly what Jesus did here. He expressed his emotions. He named his truth. And then he just kind of let that flow out of him. And he said, all right, God, I commit myself to you. I commit myself to you. Tonight I want to end by reading a Facebook post. Because in our family, we were working on this really hard. And I didn't start practicing this stuff until a few years ago. And my hope is that you will start using some of this stuff and you will be further along than I am. And that our kids will start using some of this stuff and they will be further along than I am when they're my age. This is my wife's Facebook post. She said, tonight before bed, Luna sat on my lap screaming until her face turned purple because she was angry. She was angry at Tate and then at me. She had a full-fledged meltdown that lasted a good 15 minutes, and I can account for that. Face turning purple, screaming, lasting 15 minutes. She sat with me in a safe place, surrounded by safe people, and got all the junk out, versus suppressing it for years to come and having it eat away at her insides. She was allowed to feel and allowed to be herself. And when she was done, she hugged me and told me goodnight and tinkered off to bed. I love being her mommy. And then a little hearty face with all the hearts on it. You guys, this is what God does for us. I would encourage you that if you don't have a safe place to express your emotions, that you find an adult, you find a friend, you find a safe place. You go alone by yourself and you just get all the junk out. Because what happens is we keep it bottled up inside and it eats away at us. And we have two perfect examples here as Jesus went to the cross where they just got all the junk out. What junk do you have in your life right now? What emotions have you been bottling up? When Jesus went to the cross, when he faced 24 hours that were going to change his life and change his disciples' lives, he reminded his disciples that they are loved, and he gave us a perfect example of how we should be expressing, feeling, responding to our emotions. where we find a safe place, we get it all out. Because God is big enough to handle our questions. God is big enough to handle our doubts. God is big enough to handle our fear. God is big enough to handle us not believing that he is listening and he is there right in that moment. And when we get all of that junk out and we start to find the truth and we start to say, all right, the truth is God is here. God is listening. God loves me. I am valuable. And we start to name that truth and we just let those emotions flow down the river. Guys, it is life-changing. It's life-changing. I've only been doing this for a few years and I still struggle to revert back to that place where I just take everything and I just ball it up and I push it aside and pretend like nothing's wrong. But when we can express our emotions and we can get it all out and we can let it float down the river and we can say, God, my spirit is yours, it is life-changing. And so here's my practical challenge this week. My practical challenge this week is simply this. Be aware of your emotions. What emotions are you facing? Maybe it's joy and you just need to go into your room and you need to dance like Caden did to the song we listened to during the challenge. You just need to go crazy. You need to get it all out because you are so excited and so happy about how awesome life is. Maybe it's incredible sadness and you need to go into your room and you need to just scream at God because you are stuck and you don't understand. And then you just need to start naming your truth. What emotions are you feeling? What's the truth about those emotions? What's the truth about your life? And let's just let it float. Happiness, sadness, joy, pain, fear. This week I want you to just be aware. What are my emotions? Am I allowing myself to respond to the emotions that God has given me? Because here's what I'm convinced of. God gave us emotions to help us deal with the ultra highs that we receive in this life and to help us get through the ultra lows that we receive in this life. God gave us those emotions. And so this week, I simply want to encourage you to be aware of your emotions. Just name your truth, express your emotions, name your truth, and let it float down the river. And give your spirit to the God that reminded you long before this 24 hours that changed your life started that you are loved. Check this out.